Hey, it's Alexander. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I went through a phase for a little while where I was brewing a lot of mead, which is a wine made out of honey and other additives. I actually made about 31 different batches and flavors of mead, one of which was called a cider. It was half cider and half mead. So when I made the cider, I used unfiltered apple juice and honey to make a wine. And it was okay. I didn't get the ratios right. I added a little bit too much water. So today I'm going to be making just a straight up cider, which I've never done before. I've always used honey as a sweetening agent, but today I'm using all these apples you see behind me. I've got about 4 bags of apples, give or take some. I did eat a few, but I should have enough to get about a gallon's worth of cider. So I'm just going to run you through the process and show you how it's done. So there are quite a few things you need to be able to ferment and make wine. Your first thing is going to be a container to ferment in. In this case, I have a glass carboy. This is a 1 gallon glass carboy. You can use plastic. It's not recommended to age for very long. So if you're going to do a short fermentation in plastic, that's actually fine. But if you plan to do a longer fermentation, you do want glass. Plastic has little microscopic holes in it that allows oxygen and other contaminants in the air to make their way into the container over time. So it's only good for short term. Another thing you'll need is an airlock. There's quite a few different kinds. You can actually even just have a lid on the top. I don't recommend it, but you can have a lid on the top and unscrew it to burp it. You see some people who make kombucha or even small batches of, wine or whatever, they'll just burp it every once in a while. You've probably seen somebody do it before. I prefer just getting an airlock. They're incredibly cheap. You can get them ordered directly to your door, and I can get into why they are so safe and reliable here in a moment. Another thing you're going to need is some yeast. I'm actually using Red Star Premier Classic. This stuff is usually used in red wine, but it's actually been tested in meads and is one of the best that I've come across. I've used quite a few different yeasts before. I believe it's going to perform just fine in a cider, given that I am also going to be feeding it with some yeast nutrients, which is what I'll show you next. So this is the yeast nutrients here. It's just a bag of Fermax yeast nutrient. It's just one of the many different yeast nutrients you can get out there. This is the only one I've ever used and it works just fine. I can highly recommend Fermax. And in my case, since I'm using fruit, one thing that will help us quite a bit is going ahead and getting a juicer. In this case, I just have this cheaper electric juicer that I've bought. It works pretty well. I do have to empty it out a few times as I'm going. It's much easier than hand juicing. So I highly recommend getting an electric juicer if you're going to be doing anything a gallon or above. So another thing you're going to need are some bottles. This is a 12 pack of 750 milliliter bottles. I can pop this open and show you real quick. I've never had a problem with this brand. So these are just standard bottles. They don't come with any corks at all. You do have to buy those separately. You can buy just the standard wine corks that you would have to open with a corkscrew, or you can buy some reusable ones if you plan on using them again, which is what I did. Just make sure that you have the right size cork for the neck of the bottle. This is the cork that I bought. I bought quite a few of these along with some bottles back when I was making a lot more wine. They do fit just fine, nice and snug, and you can wash them and reuse them. And it stays on there pretty well. You can push it down a little bit further. Another thing that I bought for keeping these sealed a little bit better are these shrink wrap tops. And it makes it look nice and professional. You just put a heat gun to them, or if you don't have a heat gun, you can just hold a hair dryer really close to it. It'll actually work. But it's really nice. It has a little pull tab on the top. So whenever you're ready to use it, you just pull it off and it's just like a standard wine bottle. And if you want to get really fancy with it, you can get a little label maker. This didn't cost all that much. You can label them that way, or if you want to go completely professional, you can buy stickers for the front, you can design them yourself, whatever you want to do. There's lots of fun to be had with this. So the next thing you'll need is probably the most important part in brewing. You will have to sanitize everything you use so you don't cross-contaminate or allow anything else to grow inside of your brews instead of just the yeast. In this case, I do have some Be Bright cleaner. You can buy this in a smaller container. You don't have to buy this entire thing, but from what I remember, this may have been about 30 bucks for the big box, so I just went ahead and grabbed it. This is usually safe to use on just about anything. It uses oxygen to clean. You just mix it with some hot water and soak whatever you need, give it a good scrub, and then rinse it with some cold water. I've actually already done that for everything that I'm going to be using today. My pots and pans, my utensils, the entire juicer I have cleaned, as well as the gallon carboy and my airlocks. Everything has been sanitized with this. Highly recommend it. So whenever you're brewing a batch of beer or wine or anything at all, you are essentially creating a biosphere for that yeast to feed and produce alcohol by eating sugars and whatever other nutrients it needs that's in there. But if you don't sanitize your equipment correctly, you're feeding whatever else ends up in there as well. So if there's mold, or if there's some kind of fungus or some type of bacteria, that would not be good because you're feeding it everything it needs to breed. So just sanitize everything, be extremely careful, and don't risk yourself going to the hospital. You can find this on Amazon. It's very easy to get. Again, this whole entire box was only about $30-something, if I'm remembering correctly. And that being said, let's go ahead and get started. First things first, I'm going to get my juicer out and go ahead and start juicing these apples. So I've essentially created myself a little assembly line here. I'll chop an apple, I'll put it through my juicer, it's going to juice into here, and I'm going to repeat this with all 4 bags of apples that I have stranded behind me. I'm just gonna go ahead and speed this up for you so you don't have to do this as painstakingly as I am. I will say that these do smell fantastic. I'm actually using one of my favorite apples, which is a Honeycrisp apple. They're kind of right in the middle between a nice sweet and tart apple, and I figured they would have enough sugar content to make a really nice cider. All right, so I've got 1 bag down. Let's see how much juice we get. So it looks like we got about 20 ounces worth of juice out of 1 bag. So we should have enough for a gallon if I'm thinking correctly. I'm going to take this thing apart, get all the fruit out of it, and we'll start on the next bag. I will say if you're feeling adventurous, the solids that are left over after juicing one of these things can be used in all kinds of different things. If you want to make fruit leather or applesauce and actually use the fruit solids in different types of recipes. All right, so we're now on to the next bag. Bag number 2 is cut up, time to juice it. So now that I've juiced the second bag of apples, my container is getting a little bit full, so I'm going to transfer the juice over to the carboy, and we're gonna fill this back up again. That will be good for now. I'm gonna clean this up. I'm gonna set this to the side and we'll come back to it. Now I'm on to my 3rd bag of apples. This is the one that I've eaten a few out of, just because I knew I'd have enough. So let's get to it. So I just wanna point this out. Though this apple is starting to turn, it is still technically okay. It might not be the best texture to eat, but when you're brewing, an older apple is a lot more sweet, so it can actually help improve the way that your brew tastes. So we're gonna go ahead and use this anyways. As long as there's no mold on it, you will be fine. You know the drill? Time to juice. I'm actually going to open this up and clean it out just a little bit. Turns out it was pretty gummed up in there, so I've cleared it out. We're all good now. Let's get back to it. The 3rd bag has been juiced. Time to take it back apart and clean it again. This is a little bit tedious, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. Let's go ahead and move on to the last one and get this over with. You know the drill, let's juice them. All right, let's get the rest of this juice in the carboy. But I'm going to attempt to get some of that foam to reconstitute into the juice so I can get a little bit more volume in there. So I'm just gonna use my whisk to break up all that solid foam on the surface there. And now again, it's very important that you have sanitized everything you're using. I've sanitized this whisk as well as the container that I've been juicing into, as well as the carboy I'm about to pour it all into. So now that I've got the majority of that into the carboy, let me clean up this mess real quick. Okay, so now that I've cleaned up, here is my 1 gallon of apple juice at this point. It's just fresh pressed apple juice. So now that I have my gallon of fresh pressed apple juice, all I have to do is add my yeast and my yeast nutrient, put an airlock on it, and get it to ferment. Let's get into it. So now I'm going to heat up a pot of water. So as you can see, I'm using an induction cooktop. You do have to use compatible pots and pans with an induction top. I have what I thought were 2 identical pans, one of which did not work with induction, and this one that I have in my hand actually does. And it has it labeled on the bottom of the pan. This is good for induction. It is magnetic. The electricity will pass through, the current will heat up the bottom of the pan. This is just a nice little setup for making something real quick. Now I really only need about 1/4 of a cup of water to prep the yeast, but I went ahead and grabbed a little bit of extra water so I could hydrate some of the yeast nutrient as well, and then we can add both to the carboy. So I don't need this to get incredibly hot. I need it to get around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, just so I can warm up the yeast and help it activate. Now, one important thing is to make sure that you are using purified water. If you use tap water, there will be impurities, and there may potentially be some kind of live cultures in there that can mess up your brew. I am using filtered water. I've heard of some people using distilled water if you want to play it completely safe. I've had no problems using just filtered water. If you want to play it safe, buy distilled water or bottled water. You can find filters for your sink tap, pretty inexpensive these days, so I would recommend grabbing one of those. In this case, I actually just used water from my fridge, which has a filter on the inside that I've recently changed. As long as it's really well filtered water and not just hard water from the tap, you'll be fine. Right, so now that my water is nice and warm, I'm going to scoot it to the side and I'll show you what to do. So I've got my measuring cup here. Now 1/4 of a cup is down at the very bottom. That's all you need. Right up to the 1/4 cup mark. Now this pack here is enough to brew up to 5 gallons of wine. So you don't necessarily need this whole pack. I don't plan on doing any more brews soon. I have used an entire pack in a gallon. I think it's a bit overkill, so I'm not going to use the entire pack. I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to try to use about 1/4 of the pack. Now the whole reason why I'm using warm water in particular is that letting them bloom in some warm water like this will kickstart your fermentation a little bit quicker. Now I'm going to set this to the side and let it sit for about 20 minutes. All right, so while the yeast blooms, I'm going to rehydrate the Fermax, which is the yeast nutrients, in the little bit of water that I have left. I couldn't remember exactly how much Fermax to use. I kind of searched the web a little bit. Everybody has their own opinions. So I just went ahead and looked back at my old recipes for mead. And to start off my brews, I'd put about a teaspoon's worth of Fermax in the original brew. In some brews, I did continue to give them about 1/2 teaspoon per week just to help carry on the ferment. But in this case, I'm just doing a short cider. So I believe the 1 feeding will be enough. Now I'm adding my 1 teaspoon of Fermax. Now this stuff can clump up a little bit, so I try to dust it in there the best I can, and then give it a nice quick whisk to get it all to hydrate. All right, now it's been about 20 minutes, so I'm going to add the Fermax solution in with the yeast solution. So you can see here the yeast has been dissolved into the water. There's still a little bit on the sides there, but it'll be fine. It'll continue to bloom as it sits in the brew. I'm gonna give this a nice spin here to try to get all the sediment off the bottom. And I'm just gonna add that directly in to the yeast solution. Going to give this a quick stir. And now it's time to add this to our brew. As you can see, the apple juice is kind of settled out into 3 different layers. You have the juice here at the very bottom. You kind of have this foamy substance right at the very top. There's a lot of air bubbles in there. And then you kind of have some of the apple pulp that has started rehydrating and expanding, floating towards the top too. Now I'm not too worried about this. I will filter all this out at the end, but me personally, I don't mind a cloudy mead or cider. And honestly, I think it gives it just a little bit of flavor. But there are plenty of ways to clear out your brews. I may touch base on all this again and show you different ways of clearing out your brews, but there's plenty of people out there who have done this and can show you how it's done. Golden Hive Mead is somebody who showcases the brewing process really well, and I highly recommend checking out his videos. So technically now this is a live brew, so we want to get the airlock on here as quick as possible. So again, this is my airlock. There's a few different kind out there. It's just got a few pieces. You've got the main body here. You have a little shroud that goes over the little pipe in the middle. And then you have your shielding at the top that'll help prevent bugs and other debris from getting into your brew. Now, as you can see, I do have this rubber bit here. I can actually pull that off and show you. This is a separate piece right here than the airlock. This is a carboy adapter for an airlock. So you just push it right through, and this will fit directly on the top of your carboy. So before I install the airlock on this, I'm just going to give this a good shake to get it all mixed up. All right, so for this carboy, you do need to use some kind of liquid, whether it be water or some kind of alcohol solution, something that's not going to harm your brew if it somehow gets in, but something that is going to create an air seal and also prevent any kind of bugs from flying or crawling into your brew, since it will be putting out some very strong fruit smells and very well could attract bugs. So I'm gonna pop the lid here. Now I've just got Tito's on hand. I'm going to put a little bit to the minimum mark. As you can see, there is a min and max line there. I'm just gonna put it right towards the bottom of that fill line, just so it has a little bit of play. And as you can see, it is right at the bottom of that fill line. So now I can put the lid right back on. And I do want to mention the reason why I use alcohol instead of water. Water isn't sterile, but alcohol is. So if a bug does happen to wiggle its way in through one of these holes, it'll drop down into the alcohol and it will drown and it won't ruin your brew. It's just a little bit more cleanly. So now I'm gonna take the cap off this and install my airlock. You'll want to make sure that you're pressing this down hard enough to get a nice seal, because you don't want any air getting into the brew. And there we have it. This is 1 gallon's worth of soon-to-be cider. Within a day or two, it'll start bubbling. I'll try to get a few snips here and there over the next few weeks while this ferments to show you in the next video. And I'll also explain the whole bottling process, and I'll even do a taste test on it. I do plan on bottle aging and comparing the bottle age versus the young cider, and I think that this will just be a lot of fun to play around with. So I'm going to let this sit for about 3 to 4 weeks. I'm just doing a young and quick cider. I'm not too worried about letting it get extremely alcoholic by letting it ferment for a longer period. And then I'll open it up and bottle it. So make sure you subscribe and look out for the bottling video for whenever this is done fermenting, and I'll see you then.